I want to create an album cover from this street scene. Of course, you could have any image for a record cover. It doesn't have to be like this. Because a record cover is generally 1 by 1. It's not stretched across like this. So useful tool, just go over here to the crop tool, not the frame tool, but the crop tool, select that. And then go up here, top left, and set it to 1 and 1. You've also got other options here. You've got this option here in the control bar. Click here and rule of thirds. So as you drag, you can see you get this rule of thirds, and you can just position it. You think, I really want that building to be in the centre. Want these buildings all third, sky there. That just looks right for me. I always like to work with layers. You don't really want to use the current image. So layers, just go to layer and then duplicate. Click OK. So now you've got 2 layers. Exactly the same. Also, what I want is slight blur this. I don't want so much detail. There's a lot of detail because I'm going to use the extract in a minute. So I'm just going to go to filter. And I'm going to blur and Gaussian blur. So Gaussian blur, I don't want to blur it so much that I can't see anything. So it's good to just put it to about 4 or 5 pixels. You might want to use one of the other blurs, maybe the blur gallery. Perfectly reasonable as well. Click OK. So you can still see the buildings, you can still see generally everything. Also, I don't really care for it to be in colour at this point. And you can use layer and adjustments, but you can also use image and adjustments. And I'm going to go with black and white. You could, of course, use many others. So black and white. And you can then tweak the reds. So let's just put the red so you make it a lot darker. And that's what I'm going for. I'm just going for a very dark image. Not too dark, you can't see it. But I want certain parts of it to be quite dark. So I'm just going to reduce those down. You can tweak it, you can just change things, and you can see the result of changing cyans and blues. Maybe push that there, push blues up, and click OK. And there's that result. Nice blurred and black and white. Go to the libraries panel. That's in the window menu and the libraries panel. And extract from image. Now you may see it as create. I think it's changed, the name has changed, recent versions. It's only been in a couple of versions, won't be in early CS6, etc. So extract from image. Now another way of doing this would be to go to Illustrator and using the tracing in Illustrator and copy it back. I haven't got Illustrator, so I'm using this extract from image. It's not super fast, and by default it goes for patterns. I'm going to go to shape. And I'm going to set it to about the middle, about there. I want it dark, so I don't want it too dark. I don't want it like that dark. You can go too far, or you can go for very, so you can virtually see nothing. So I'm just going to go about there. You could go smooth on save. I think the result looks great for some things, but if you want to actually see the buildings, you want to see it without having curves in it, I think it's best to keep smooth on save off. And you could, of course, use invert if you want. It's another option. Makes it more a nighttime scene. It's up to you, of course. Smooth on save. I'm going to keep that. So save to CC libraries. Now it's not super fast. It's not super slow either. It does do it. It creates a vector design. It says saved at the top now. It's done it. So I can close at this point. And I've got the image capture shape here. You can see the design I'm aiming for here. That was an early attempt at that. So close. Now I've got this design over here, capture shape 6. You can rename it if you want, but you can also drag it across. So just drag it across and you've got it on top. And it's a vector. So if you've got Illustrator, you can edit it in Illustrator. I haven't. But you can also then reposition it. Now, I don't want it to be exactly the same position. I want it to be slightly bigger. It's a vector design. It can be any size. But I just want it to be You can see the building behind, you can still see the general view of it, but you've now got this lovely design on top. And again, you can always decide, you know what, I want it at a slight angle. You don't have to have it the same thing. You can always decide, you know what, let's just put it at an angle. Just as good as well. I think that creates a bit of a tension in the scene, but I'm just going to go with that and press return. So I've got my design now. It's like I say, a vector layer. I can manipulate it with effects, of course, do many other things. I'm not. But also, I do want some colour in it. And I'm going to go with red. And you can see what I've got. I've got over here, red and white over here. They're the colours. So I can go to the gradients. So let's just go to the gradients. I'm going to add a gradient layer. So gradient layer, and down to new fill layer and gradient. You could, of course, use gradient tool, but then you have to create a pixel layer and add it and manipulate it there. I think gradient layer, perfectly reasonable. Give it a name. It's always a good idea to name things. I don't. Regret that sometimes. And you can see it's put it there. Now I want the sky to be red. I want it to be a blood red, the sky. That's why I went for the red. Now this gradient, the one I'm using, is this one that's the special one that uses the foreground and the background colour. Foreground and background. It's in the basics. So select that one. If you haven't got that, you should have it. You've deleted it by accident. But it's very useful. But what you can do is you can reverse it. And then it puts it at the top. And that's where I want it. Now, the great thing about the gradient fill layer is you can then move it. So if you want to, you can. I still want the red. Now I can move it that way. You can't see the image at all then. But you can push it up. I still want it red, but I don't want too much red there. Now I could mask it. I'm not going to do that. But you could mask that area so it doesn't have so much red there. But I'm happy with that. I think it looks good as well. Click OK. Well, you've got that design there now. Of course, an album cover doesn't have to, of course. It can have the band's name. It could just have the title. Obviously, I haven't thought of a name for the band, but I was going to go with On the Streets, a very unoriginal name. So go to the type tool, horizontal type tool, and then add some type. I'm just going to say On the Streets. And it always defaults to lorem ipsum. Obviously, that is not the greatest of titles, but I want On the Streets. I'm just going to resize it. Just resize it. So I don't want it that small. You can always hold down the shift or not and just drag. Up to you and create. Now you can fill it where you want. Put it up here, put it down there. I think it looks nicer. Maybe you want to see the buildings there. You got the street. I think the street works nicer just having that just down there. And you want it central. So you've got that smart guide that pops up and says that is in the centre. You can generally guess where the centre is, but it's nice that it tells you. Now you can see I've got a font already there applied, and you can select it. I think yellow and red, I like yellow and red combination, but you can go with any colour scheme. White would work well, but you can try them out. Simply go up here and just run through them. Blues, greens. Personally, I think yellow is nice. I'm going to stick with yellow. Font. Very useful feature if you've got the Creative Cloud or part of the Creative Cloud is that you can go here, type and more Adobe fonts. Now, obviously, while I've got this active, it doesn't allow that. But what it does, it goes off and you've got access to loads and loads of fonts. I never know which ones are not or which ones you can use, which ones you can't. It always says commercial or not, it will tell you. So always check whether you can use them in your commercial work. Very key thing there. And so you've got a load, and I looked for a more sort of rough grunge look. I came across one called John Doe. I don't know, I've never used it. I selected it and brought it back in. But you've got loads of other ones you can see you can run through. But John Doe, and the thing is, you can always select all the ones that are the ones there. You can see John Doe. Conveniently, it puts it right at the top. Very useful. Doesn't mean you don't have to search miles down the long list. So you've got that John Doe one there. And I like that one. I've got lots of these other fonts, but always with fonts, make certain about the license. And set it, press return. And good old what's name decides to come into the conversation. And I've set it to blue. Didn't mean to do that. Don't like blue. I'm just going to go with that one. However, what I want now, I don't want it to be so sharp looking. Now I could apply a blur. So I'm just going to go there again, just select it. And I can go to filter. And I can go down to the blurs. And there's a lot of blurs. And I think motion blur is quite a nice one. I'm just going to go with motion blur. Now you could have it going. And it will come up and say, convert to smart object. And you can see the result. Now, of course, at this point, I love it. -90, 375 for the distance. It looks good, but you can't read it. Not very good if you're trying to sell an album. You cannot read the right. I mean, some people like that. I don't. Personally, I like to see the text. So I'm just going to click OK at this point. Unfortunately, there's no options for setting the blending mode at this point. So click OK. But you can go over here and you can see on the streets, got the text there, and you can double click here. Motion blur, that's the smart filter. You can see it in that layers panel and you can double click. And that's useful because what you can do, you can go through and say darken. Now darken's okay. I think quite a lot of them work quite well actually. Lighten works nice, overlay. They all give that effect that I want, which is has the text and also you've got the blurred writing. And you can still, if you want to, change that. So motion, double click the motion blur and you can say, oh, I want it stretched a bit more. So instead of 345, I can put it to 560. So the text is really stretched out, really stretched, and it's going at -90. Again, you could put it at any angle, but I think it's nice to have it going up towards that red, zooming upwards on the streets. And click OK. Now I've got this image and I can save it. Obviously, the next thing to do, always very useful, is to go to File and Save As and just save it, obviously, to your Creative Cloud, if you've got the space, which is always a key thing, or save to your computer, which is always useful. I always think it's a pity that Photoshop doesn't allow you to do both at the same time. It would be very nice because I actually do want to save it to my cloud and I also want to save it to my desktop. But I'm not going to save it here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to save it to my library. And a really very quick. Now you can see you've got an issue here. It's slightly bigger. That's a minor issue when you're creating the smart object. But still, it does mean when you come to edit it later, you've got a bit of flexibility to manipulate the layers. You can go to Layer and then Smart Objects and Convert to Smart Object. So Convert to Smart Object. So all converted to Smart Object. And you'll notice that I've missed one. And that's always a bad mistake, not looking to see that you've got everything selected. So make certain you deselect that one, select that one, select that one, select them all. Make certain they're all selected. If you don't do that, the smart object you create will not be complete. So then go to Layer and Smart Objects and you'll see what happens when it doesn't. It ends up making a bit of a mishmash of it. Convert to Smart Object. So it's all one smart object now. And it does mean you can edit it later. But it does also mean you can quickly just drag it into your library. You'd think you'd be able to do that, but you can't. Used to be able to do it, I'm quite certain. But however, I might be wrong. You can always just do it here. Just go to the plus at the bottom and graphic. Maybe it's another application that does that. But still, graphic. It should do it. I always think you should be able to. Some things you can drag, some things you can't. Anyway, you can see now you've got it over there on the streets. So it's saved. So that's the key thing. Go over here. Make certain you just click the plus. And then sometimes it seems to just let you only have allow one option. That's very strange. But you should be able to save it to the library that way. And then of course you can then use it at a later time. Just create another document with the same size. But of course, as you've got this as a smart object, you can always at any point just go over here and double click on there. And you can see what happens. Now this is the thing I said about the size. The size is slightly odd in that suddenly you've got this bit extending beyond, because of course I've made the document that's vector shape slightly bigger than the document. It saves it all. So you've ended up with something slightly bigger, which is interesting, but it does mean that you've got the option to manipulate it. So you can go for this capture shape and you can then rotate it. So you can create different designs. So you don't have to go with what you had just before. So you might turn around and say, let's just reposition it. Go for something like that. Press return. And then you can go, well, I don't want on the streets there. I want on the streets, say there, at the side. That's quite nice as well. I think it just slightly pushing it aside. Or maybe have the, click OK, have the on street go in slightly at an angle to the other one. So you've got 45 degrees obviously for that one. Maybe have the text at 45 as well. And you can then, of course, press return. And you've still got the effects. Though at this point, you'll notice that the effects now are still at 90 degrees, which is not ideal, but it does mean double click there. And I've got the blur, don't want that. Just want to click the motion blur. I want to set that to -45. So you can see, or maybe slightly just change that. Doesn't seem to be 45. Yeah, so you can see by just changing it to 60, you can then change the angle for that motion blur, because, you know, it's going to look a bit odd if it's not going at that angle, if that's what you want to achieve. And you can, of course, modify the distance, maybe make it bigger, because you've got a bit more space down here. Press return, click OK. And then you can close it. It's a PSB file. So just close it, save. And now process it. And now you can see your document. Again, you can still manipulate it again. You can still go back to it, edit it again. But you've got this newly designed modified document. And then you can tweak that. And of course, file. And you can go and export, save it, PNG or some other format. PDF is a good one, of course, for using maybe with albums, but you might be exporting it to another application. PSD is fine for Illustrator, InDesign, etc. All those sort of applications. And then, of course, you can always print it off if you want to print off and see how your album cover will work in, obviously, a CD case. Do they still exist, CD cases? Well, if they do, then you can create it that way. But of course, you can use the same approach. I'm doing this obviously for a record cover, a CD cover. But you could do the same with book covers or anything. Combination of smart objects to manipulate, change, tweak the results, using layers, using blending modes, combining them, combining text, using text from obviously go up here, more from Adobe fonts. You've got a vast range of different options to be able to create a very basic album cover from obviously a street scene in my hometown. Obviously, you have to use your own hometown, maybe go and get some photographs that way. Hope you found this of interest. Any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you much.